Why this horse refused to leave her grave for 7 years. The wind off the high plains was colder than Evan remembered. It bit through his coat as he stepped off the rust-ridden bus, the same one he used to take in high school. The town hadn't changed much in 10 years, maybe a few more potholes, a boarded-up diner, and a new name on the church sign. But the same smell of dust, hay, and distant pine clung to the air like a ghost. Evan Vale hadn't planned on coming back. Not after the trial, not after everything that had happened with Lydia. But death has a way of dragging people back to places they swore off. And now he was here, clutching a duffel bag with 2 shirts, a broken phone, and the weight of a past that hadn't finished with him. Lydia was gone, that much was certain. But the how had left the town whispering. The official word was suicide. But that didn't track. Lydia Vale was a fighter, bold, sharp-tongued, relentless. She was the kind of person who lit up rooms and kicked down doors, the kind of person who'd once broken a teacher's nose for calling her unstable, the kind who'd raised Evan like a mother when their real one ran off. She wouldn't have left, not without a reason, not without saying goodbye. The small funeral was 2 days earlier. Evan missed it. He hadn't found out until it was over. He got a text from the sheriff, of all people. "Your sister's been laid to rest. Sorry for your loss. Don't stir things up." That was the kind of town this was, where law and secrets held hands. He trudged up the dirt road to the old family ranch on the edge of the hills, where the skeletal trees leaned in like eavesdroppers. The house was padlocked, though it didn't need to be. It had already been picked clean by memory and time. He didn't go inside. Instead, he followed the sound. It was faint at first, like hooves stamping the dry earth. Rhythmic, uneasy, and there she was. A horse, standing alone beside a simple makeshift grave near the edge of the wheat field. She was a tall black and chestnut mare, her mane tangled from wind and time. Her eyes were rimmed with gray as though she'd been crying, though Evan knew better. Her name was Astra, Lydia's horse. The two had been inseparable. Evan remembered Lydia riding Astra bareback, tearing through the fields like some kind of wild myth. "She's more human than most people," Lydia used to say. "She feels what I feel." Now Astra stood motionless, her head lowered toward the cross made of 2 old fence posts. She hadn't left the grave since the day Lydia died. Locals said she refused food, refused water. Every morning and every night, she returned to this spot, just waiting. Astra flicked her ears as Evan approached. She didn't bolt, but she didn't move either. "Hey girl," Evan whispered, his voice cracking. "Do you remember me?" The mare's eyes met his, and something old and broken in him gave way. He sank to his knees beside the grave, ran a hand along the wooden cross. No name carved, no flowers, just raw earth. "What happened to you, Lyd?" he murmured. "Why here? Why now?" A breeze kicked up, rustling the wheat. Then, something odd. Astra stepped forward and tapped her hoof 3 times. Slow, deliberate, then backed away. Evan blinked. What was that? He stood, brushed dirt from his jeans, and stared at the grave again. Something about the positioning was strange, lopsided. The earth slightly collapsed in one corner as if something was buried too shallow, or maybe not buried at all. And Astra kept pawing the same spot. A pattern. Was she trying to tell him something? That night, Evan stayed in the old barn. The roof leaked and smelled like mold, but it was the only shelter not padlocked or condemned. Astra stood outside the entire night, unmoving. Evan watched her through the crack in the door, haunted by the eerie stillness. When morning came, he visited town. People stared. He wasn't welcome. Not after what had happened before. A few muttered sorry about your sister, but none met his eyes. The grocer refused to sell him bread. The gas station clerk didn't change. Only the old librarian, Miss Carter, dared speak longer than a minute. "You should go back, Evan," she whispered, leaning across the counter like they were planning a heist. "There are things here better left alone." What things? Things she was digging into. Lydia didn't believe the suicide story either. Evan's breath caught. What was she looking into? Ms. Carter hesitated, then slipped him a torn page from a notebook. On it, Lydia had scribbled names, places, and one chilling phrase. "It didn't start with me." Back at the ranch, Evan stood again beside the grave. He watched Astra closely. She circled the plot twice, then stomped once and looked back at him. A deliberate motion, almost rehearsed. He knelt and touched the soft dirt. It crumbled too easily, fresh soil over older ground. Was this really Lydia's grave? A sudden gust knocked over the cross, and beneath it was something shiny. A coin. Not just any coin. An antique church token, the kind given by the town's old priest, Father Oren, for confession. One side bore a lamb, the other a hand with an open eye. Evan's blood ran cold. Lydia hadn't gone to church in years. Why would she have this? And why buried under her grave? Astra let out a sharp, low whinny, not fear, warning. Evan turned toward the woods behind the field. Just in time to see a shadow disappear between the trees. Someone was watching. That night, he sat beside the mare, resting his back against the cold wood of the barn. "You're not just grieving, are you?" he whispered. "You're trying to lead me somewhere." Astra let out a soft huff and lowered her head beside his. For the first time in years, Evan didn't feel alone. The past wasn't buried. Not yet, but he was about to dig it up. Evan Vale stood beneath the towering weeping willow that shaded Lydia's grave, his fingers loosely holding the reins of Astra, who hadn't moved from this spot in days. The horse's loyalty was touching, but it unnerved Evan too. Something about Astra's vigilance felt more like a warning than a mourning. Despite his initial reluctance, Evan had decided to stay in Durnell longer than planned. The townsfolk's cryptic glances and half-spoken condolences gnawed at him. Lydia hadn't just died. Something had happened. And Astra, ever silent and ever watching, might be the only witness. Evan's first few days in Lydia's old house were haunted not by ghosts, but by her presence. Every room told a story she didn't live long enough to finish. Her journals, her art, even the clothes still hanging in the closet felt frozen in time. One afternoon, while sorting through a wooden chest at the foot of Lydia's bed, Evan found a stack of letters addressed to someone named H, signed only with Lydia's name. The handwriting was frantic. "They're watching me. Even when I walk Astra. I think they know I found the records." Another read, "Don't trust Mason. He's not who he used to be." Mason Baird, Lydia's childhood friend, now the sheriff of Durnell. He had greeted Evan the day of the funeral with a hollow warmth, like someone shaking hands with a ghost. Evan hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now he felt the echo of those words like a cold draft. Don't trust Mason. Evan pocketed the letters and decided to pay Mason a visit. At the sheriff's station, Mason welcomed Evan with a cup of coffee and a practiced smile. "I know it's hard, losing family," he said, eyes scanning Evan like a lie detector. "She was troubled. Thought people were after her." Evan kept his expression neutral. "Did you ever ask why?" Mason hesitated for half a breath. She thought she was onto something. Some conspiracy. Said the town had secrets. She'd get these ideas in her head, twist them around until they felt real. Evan nodded. "Did she ever tell you what exactly she'd found?" Mason leaned back, sighing. "Look, Evan, sometimes people dig too deep and forget how to come back up for air." There was sympathy in his voice, but Evan couldn't ignore the subtle warning, like Mason was telling him, "Leave it alone." That night, Evan returned home and went straight to the barn. Astra stood motionless, her dark eyes meeting him. He felt an odd compulsion, like if he just stayed still long enough, she'd speak. Instead, he noticed something tied around her saddle. A piece of cloth, muddy and torn, with what looked like initials sewn in faded thread. C.R. The next day, Evan tracked down Clara Rain, the town's quiet school teacher and a former friend of Lydia's. He found her at the library, surrounded by shelves of old local records. When Evan showed her the cloth and asked about the initials, Clara paled. C.R. That's Curtis Rain, my brother. I didn't know you had a brother. You're not supposed to. He disappeared 10 years ago. Lydia used to ask questions about him, said it didn't add up. His case, the timing. She thought it was tied to the old estate. The Lorne estate? Clara nodded, lowering her voice. That land's cursed. Everyone knows it. People who dig into its history either leave town or end up like Lydia. Evan's pulse quickened. Why would a horse have something of your brother's? I don't know, but Lydia and Astra spent a lot of time near the estate in her last weeks. Evan's path was becoming clearer. Lydia had discovered something near the Lorne estate, and it cost her life. That evening, Evan made his way toward the edge of town, toward the overgrown trail leading to the estate. Astra followed without needing to be led. She moved with purpose, not fear. The estate loomed in the distance, a crumbling remnant of wealth and secrets. As Evan stepped through its rusted gates, Astra stopped cold and let out a low, trembling breath. Evan glanced at her, ears forward, eyes locked on something invisible. Inside the remains of the house, the air was thick with mold and memory. He found a study with a collapsed bookshelf. As he sifted through the debris, a file folder fell out, dusty but intact. Inside were photocopied town records, land deeds, medical logs, death certificates. Evan flipped through them until he found Lydia's handwriting in the margins. Multiple disappearances, all connected to the estate. The sheriff's office filed them under voluntary relocation. Curtis Rain was the last. Then another note. There's a ledger in the barn. Curtis kept track. The town knew. Just then, a creak behind him. Evan spun, expecting rats. Instead, a figure stepped into the light. Mason. I told you to let it lie, he said. Evan stood his ground. She died because of what she found. She died because she couldn't stop, and now you're just like her. Mason's hand hovered near his belt, too close to the holster. Astra let out a loud, piercing whinny from outside. It broke the tension for a beat, enough for Evan to back away and slip outside. I'll find the truth, he said, voice shaking but resolute, even if I have to drag it out of this dirt. Back home, Evan found the barn where Lydia had once kept Curtis's old saddle and gear. Beneath a false floorboard, he discovered the ledger Lydia referenced. It listed names, dates, and dollar amounts. It was a payoff log. Bribes, silencing money, maybe even bounties, and one name appeared more than any other. M. The next few pages were torn out, but the pattern was clear. Lydia had found proof that Mason had been covering something up, possibly orchestrating disappearances and tying them to land disputes or political leverage. Evan realized Lydia had uncovered it all and tried to expose it. Astra had likely been with her during those final moments. Now Evan had the truth, but he also had a target on his back. The town seemed to know something had shifted. People avoided Evan. Someone broke his mailbox in the night. Astra was spooked more easily now, more restless. Evan began sleeping in the barn beside her, both for comfort and out of instinct. She was the only one who wouldn't lie to him. Late one night, Evan heard movement near the house. A shadow moved near the porch, then the sound of glass shattering. He ran out, Astra galloping behind him, and caught sight of a figure fleeing into the trees. He chased, but Astra outran him, cutting through the woods with supernatural grace. When he caught up, she stood over a fallen man, face bloodied, ankle twisted. It was one of Mason's deputies. Evan dragged the man back to the barn and called Clara. When she saw the man, she whispered, "That's Jonas. He used to come by Curtis's place, always asking questions about the ledger. Curtis wrote about him once, said he was dangerous. The stakes had become brutally clear. This wasn't just about Lydia anymore. There were systemic secrets buried in Durnall's soil, and Evan, guided by the horse that wouldn't leave his sister's grave, was about to dig them all up.
The morning after the attack, Evan stood in the barn watching Astra nuzzle the ground where she had pinned the fleeing deputy. Her dark mane shimmered in the early sunlight, but her eyes remained fixed, watchful, like she knew more danger was coming. He couldn't shake the feeling that Astra wasn't just loyal, she was trying to guide him. Clara returned with an old journal belonging to her brother, Curtis Rain. She'd found it hidden in a false panel behind her childhood dresser. Most of the entries were fragmented, but one page stood out. It read, "I've seen what they're doing near the estate. At night. Sounds like digging, machinery. Lydia says it's not just land grabs. She thinks it's tied to something under the town. Something they covered up after the fire in '89. Evan's breath caught. The 1989 fire had destroyed part of the Lawn estate and claimed several lives. It was considered an accident, faulty wiring, but now that explanation felt too convenient. Another entry. Lydia and I followed the sheriff one night. He met with two men by the old cistern near the orchard, passed them a bag, looked like cash. Astra spooked when one of them saw us. We ran. I think they know now. Evan closed the journal, heart racing. That orchard still stood, mostly wild now, near the crumbling edge of the estate. If there was a cistern there, maybe Lydia left something hidden. He saddled Astra and rode out without telling anyone. The horse moved like she knew exactly where to go. No hesitation, no need for reins. The orchard was dead silent. Astra stopped near a fallen willow tree. Beneath its roots, the earth looked disturbed. Evan jumped down, heart thudding, and began to dig with his hands. After only a few minutes, he hit something metallic, an old lockbox. He yanked it free and broke it open. Inside were three things. 1, a cassette tape labeled Lydia, October 3rd. 2, a folded town map with red ink circling underground piping near the Lawn estate. 3, a single page of typed notes. Town's water rerouted after '89 fire. Estate borehole sealed. Original access beneath chapel. Astra snorted, kicking at the ground. Evan looked up, squinting through the orchard's branches. A figure stood near the tree line. It was Sheriff Mason Baird. "You should have left, Evan," Mason called out, stepping forward with a pistol in hand. Evan raised his hands. "Lydia didn't die by accident." Mason laughed. "Of course she didn't. But you think anyone's going to believe you? A guy who hasn't been here in 15 years? Astra stepped between them, head lowered, nostrils flaring. "I have the ledger, Curtis's journal, the letters." "You're done, Mason," Evan said. Mason cocked his gun. "Then let's finish this." Before Evan could move, Astra lunged. The horse surged forward, rearing and striking. Mason stumbled back, falling hard. The gun clattered from his hand and slid across the grass. Evan dove for it, grabbing it before Mason could recover. "Don't move," he said, leveling the weapon. For the first time, Mason looked afraid. Back at Lydia's house, Evan called Clara and the only local reporter he trusted, Marcy Deal. He played the cassette. Lydia's voice came through, shaking but resolute. "If you're hearing this, it means I couldn't stop them. The sheriff is using old boreholes under the estate to hide toxic dumping. They rerouted the water to avoid detection, but it's still seeping into town wells. Kids have been getting sick. Curtis found evidence, then he vanished. I think Astra saw it. She keeps going back there, pawing at the old chapel hill, like she remembers. Astra, always at Lydia's side, always returning to the grave. And the chapel hill? The town's chapel had burned down in the same '89 fire. Evan, Clara, and Marcy drove out that night. Astra followed, leading them to a grassy knoll behind the ruins of the old chapel. When they reached the top, Astra began to dig with her hooves, snorting and pawing furiously. Evan dropped to his knees and joined her. Beneath a layer of stone, they found a rusted metal hatch. They pried it open. A wave of stale air rushed out. A ladder led downward. Evan descended first. The others followed, Astra waiting above, still pacing. The tunnel below was part of the town's forgotten infrastructure, a sealed-off borehole chamber. Along the walls were old barrels marked with faded biohazard symbols. Most were corroded. Marcy took photo after photo. "Jesus," Clara whispered. "How long has this been under here?" There were stacks of documents in a rotted cabinet, environmental reports, water samples, signatures from town officials. Everything Lydia had suspected was true. They used the estate fire as cover, Evan said, and buried this secret beneath the church to make it untouchable. And Curtis must have found this, Clara added, and they made sure he never left. There, behind the barrels, bones. Clara gasped. Curtis's wallet lay beside them. She dropped to her knees, crying softly. When they emerged, Marcy made the call to the State Environmental Authority. Evan turned over the documents, the tape, the ledger, and the map. Within 48 hours, the story exploded. The town of Durnell was rocked by scandal. Mason Baird was arrested and charged with obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and the cover-up of multiple deaths. Several former council members were implicated. Emergency water testing was ordered. And through it all, Astra stayed by Lydia's grave. Evan visited every day. "I know now why you stayed," he whispered, brushing her mane. "You were trying to finish what Lydia started." In the weeks that followed, Clara held a memorial for Curtis, and the town erected a new plaque near the chapel ruins in honor of both him and Lydia. A pair of truth-seekers silenced too soon. Evan considered leaving, but the townspeople began to come around. Lydia's former students, now adults, stopped by to thank him. Some offered to help restore the estate grounds as a historical site. And Astra? She no longer stood vigil at the grave. Her job was done. Instead, she roamed the orchard freely, no longer restless or guarded, just peaceful. One morning, Evan watched her from the porch as she trotted toward the sunrise. He whispered, "Good girl," and felt something inside him release. The grief, the guilt, it was still there. But now it had a purpose. Because Lydia had been right. And Astra, her silent companion, had made sure the world would finally listen. The wind was softer now. The kind of breeze that whispered peace instead of secrets. Evan stood beneath the sycamore tree, overlooking the chapel ruins, watching the morning mist rise over the fields. Astra stood beside him, still and calm, her dark eyes fixed on the plaque that now bore Lydia's name. It had been 3 weeks since the truth came to light, since the town finally faced its ghosts. And still, Evan felt like he was learning how to breathe again. The estate, once silent and cold, had found new life. Volunteers, neighbors, students, even strangers from nearby towns came together to clean the grounds. The burnt edges of the chapel had been cleared, wildflowers planted in their place. It no longer felt like a tomb, but a sanctuary. Clara walked up the hill carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to Evan without a word. They stood shoulder to shoulder in silence. "I still hear her voice," Clara said after a moment. "Every time the wind shifts." Evan nodded. She never really left. They watched Astra step forward, lowering her head to nuzzle the grass beside the plaque. The mayor hadn't visited the grave every day now, but when she did, it felt ceremonial, as if she were paying respect, not mourning. "She always knew," Clara added softly. "Even when we didn't, she never gave up." Evan sipped the coffee, eyes misting. "Lydia once told me that horses feel what we try to hide. Fear, sadness, love. Maybe Astra held onto it all until someone came back to finish the story." That night, Evan wandered into the old stables where Lydia had once kept her journals and lesson plans. He had converted it into a small reading room, a memorial space filled with her writings, Curtis's drawings, and photos of the students they'd taught. One of the photos caught his eye. It was Lydia, seated on a bench, young and bright-eyed, holding the reins of a colt with a familiar dark coat. "Astra," Evan whispered, tracing the edge of the frame. She had been with Lydia from the beginning. More than just a pet, more than just a horse, a witness, a guardian. Later, Evan sat by the fireplace with Astra lying beside the porch, her body curled in the grass, perfectly still. The stars glowed above, and for the first time in years, the house felt like home again. He thought of everything they had uncovered, the poisoned wells, the corruption, the deaths. But beneath all that darkness, there was something else too. Loyalty, love, purpose. He reached into a box beside him and pulled out Lydia's final letter, one she had written to him but never mailed. It had been found among her things, tucked behind a photograph of the 2 of them as teenagers. He unfolded the paper. "Dear Evan, if you're reading this, I hope it means you found your way back. I hope you've forgiven yourself for leaving. You were always trying to fix broken things, Evan. Sometimes we have to let others carry that burden too." I stayed behind because I couldn't turn my back on the truth, even when it cost me. Astra stayed because I think she understood it better than anyone. She never needed words. You always asked me why I loved this town. It wasn't the streets or the buildings. It was the people who still believed in doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. People like Curtis. People like Astra. Maybe even people like us. If it's not too late, stay. Not for the past, but for what we can still build. This place doesn't need another savior. It needs someone who remembers how to listen. Love, Lydia. Evan folded the letter and held it close to his chest. The firelight flickered. The night felt warm, not heavy. He stood, walked to the porch and sat beside Astra. She blinked slowly, nudging his knee. "I'm staying," he whispered. "You were right. She was right. This place deserves a second chance." The mare let out a soft breath and rested her head near his boots. The next morning, Evan awoke early. He found Astra standing near the orchard, staring out toward the hills. He approached, expecting her to nudge him playfully or lead him toward the barn for oats. But she stood still, quiet, peaceful. Evan's breath caught. Her ears flicked once. Her gaze met his. And then she knelt, slowly, gracefully into the grass, like she was laying down one last time. Evan rushed forward, that heart pounding. "Astra?" She rested her head on the earth, her breath soft but fading. No struggle, no pain, just stillness. He dropped beside her, burying his face into her mane. "Thank you," he whispered, voice cracking, "for staying with her, for staying with me." Tears fell freely, soaking into her coat. He wrapped his arms around her neck as the sun rose, casting gold across the orchard. She didn't move again. They buried Astra beside Lydia, not behind a fence, not beneath a marker, but under the sycamore tree, where she could rest with the wind and the sun and the earth she'd never left behind. The town came out in silence. Clara brought wildflowers. Children placed apples and drawings. Even Sheriff Baird's replacement, a young deputy who once trained under Lydia, spoke a few words. She wasn't just a horse. She was a guardian of truth. Evan stood apart, watching the crowd, eyes red but clear. For the first time, he didn't feel like a stranger in his own town. He was home. In the weeks that followed, Evan turned Lydia's estate into a community center. He taught horseback riding to kids who had never touched a rein. He held classes under the trees, told stories of Lydia and Curtis and Astra, of bravery, silence and love. He'd often catch himself looking toward the orchard, expecting to see Astra watching him from the shadows. And sometimes, when the wind rustled just right, he'd swear he did see her. Just a shape, just a feeling. But that was enough, because Astra had finished her journey. And now it was Evan's turn to carry the truth forward, for Lydia, for the town, and for the horse that wouldn't leave her grave until the world finally listened.